I would like to introduce you to Latanusi." She held her hand towards one of the three, and I bowed. "Latanusi was, about 14,000 of your years ago, the last king of the continent Mu on Earth." "I don't understand." "You don't want to understand, Michel, and at this particular moment you resemble many of your peers on Earth." I must have looked troubled, for Tao, Biastra and Latole laughed loudly. "Don't look like that, Michel. I just meant to jostle you a little. Now, in the presence of Latanusi, I'm going to explain one of the mysteries that eludes many experts on your planet, who, I might add, would do better to devote their precious time discovering more useful things. I am going to unveil not one, but several of the mysteries which obsess them." Our seats were arranged in a circle. Tao sat next to Latanusi, and I sat facing them. As I already explained during our journey to Thiaooubans, the Baccaratinians arrived on Earth 1,350,000 years ago. 30,000 years later came the terrible cataclysm that gouged out seas and caused the emergence of islands and even continents. I made mention also of an enormous continent which arose in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. This continent was called Lunar, but is better known to you as the continent of Mu. It emerged virtually in one piece, to be shattered 2,000 years later by seismic shock into three principal constituents. With the passing of years, vegetation established on these continents, large areas of which were located in equatorial regions. Grass grew, forests established, and gradually animals migrated across the very narrow isthmus that bound Mu to North America. The yellow race that had better managed to come to terms with the disastrous consequences of the cataclysm were first to construct ships and explore the seas. About 300,000 Earth years ago, they landed on the northwest coast of Mu, where they eventually founded a small colony. This colony barely grew over the course of centuries, as there were difficulties in expatriating, which would take too long to explain and which does not concern us now. About 250,000 Earth years ago, the inhabitants of planet Aremo X3, on which we stopped to take samples during our journey here, embarked on an interplanetary voyage of exploration penetrating your solar system. After having skirted Saturn, Jupiter, Mars and Mercury, they landed on the planet Earth in China, where their spacecraft caused considerable panic among the populace. Their legends refer to fire dragons descending from the sky. The fear and mistrust of the Chinese led them eventually to attack the aliens, who were forced to use violence in order to defend themselves. This they hated, for they were not only technologically advanced, but also highly spiritual people, who abhorred killing. They moved on, continuing their exploration of the planet. It turned out that the continent of Mu had most appeal for them for two main reasons. First, the continent appeared to be virtually uninhabited, and second, by virtue of its latitude, it was a veritable paradise. They had become particularly cautious since their confrontation with the Chinese, and felt it would be wise to establish a base to which they could retreat should they encounter further hostilities of a serious nature from Earth people. I have not yet explained that their reason for exploring Earth was their intention of resettling several million people from Aremo X3, a planet that was becoming uncomfortably overpopulated. This operation was much too serious to take risks of any kind. Thus it was decided that their base of retreat would be set up not on Earth, but on the Moon, which was quite close and considered very safe. 50 years were spent establishing the lunar bases, and it wasn't until they were ready that emigration to Mu began. All went well. The small Chinese colony that had existed in the northwest of Mu had been totally destroyed some decades after their first visit, so in effect they had the entire continent to themselves. Work began immediately on the construction of towns, canals and roads, which they paved with immense flagstones. Their usual means of transport was a flying chariot, not unlike our Lativox. From their planet they imported animals, such as the dog and the armadillo, which they were very partial to on Aremo X3, and also the pig. When she told me about all those imported animals, I remembered how astonished I'd been to see pigs and dogs on that famous planet during our earlier visit. Suddenly everything was very clear to me. In height, these people averaged 180 centimetres for the males and 160 centimetres for the females. Their hair was dark, their eyes of a beautiful black, and their skin lightly bronzed. You saw some of their kind when we stopped at Aremo X3, and I believe you've already guessed them to be ancestors of the Polynesians. So they established settlements throughout the length and breadth of the continent, including 19 large cities, 7 of which were sacred. Small villages were also numerous, for these people were highly skilled farmers and graziers. Their political system was modelled on that of Aremo X3. They had long ago discovered that the only way to govern a country properly was to place at the head of government 7 men of integrity, representing no political party but sincerely committed to doing what they could for their nation. The 7th among them was the supreme judge, whose vote on council was worth 2. If 4 were against him and 2 with him on a particular issue, they were at deadlock, and hours or days of debate would ensue until at least one of the 7 was persuaded to change his vote. This debate was conducted within a context of intelligence, love, and concern for the people. These high figures received no great material benefits for leading the nation. It was their vocation to lead, and they did it for the love of serving their country. This avoided the problem of hiding opportunists among the leaders. Same can't be said of our national leaders now, I remarked with a hint of bitterness. Where were such men found? The procedure was as follows. In a village or district, a man of integrity was elected by referendum. No one with a record of bad conduct or a tendency towards fanaticism could be chosen. The chosen one would have demonstrated integrity in all spheres. He would then be sent to the nearest town, along with other representatives from neighbouring villages, and there further elections would be held. For example, if there were 60 villages, there would be 60 men elected by the people for their integrity and not for promises which they made but couldn't keep. Representatives from all over the nation would meet together in the capital city. They would be divided into groups of 6, and each group assigned a particular conference room. For the next 10 days, the groups would be together, holding discussions, sharing meals, enjoying shows, and eventually they would elect a group leader. So if there had been 60 representatives, divided into 10 groups, there would be 10 group leaders. Of these 10, 7 would be elected by the same process, and from the 7, an eventual supreme leader would emerge. He was given the title of king. So, he was a Republican king, I said. Tao smiled at my remark, and Latanusi gave a slight frown. The king was elected in this way only if his predecessor died without having nominated a successor, or if the successor was not unanimously accepted by the Council of 7. He was given the title of king, first because he was the representative on earth of the Great Spirit, and second because 9 times out of 10 he would be the son or near relative of the preceding king. Something like the Roman method, then? Yes, indeed. However, if this king manifested the slightest tendency towards dictatorship, he was overthrown by his council of peers. But let's go back now to our emigrants from Aremo X3. Their capital city, given the name Savanasa, was situated on a plateau overlooking the Gulf of Suvatu. The plateau was 300 meters high, and except for 2 hills, one in the southwest and one in the southeast, this was the highest point on the continent of Mu. I'm sorry, Tao, may I interrupt? When you explained the cataclysm which knocked the Earth off its axis, you said that refuge on the Moon was not possible because it didn't exist. And yet now you say that safety bases were established on the Moon for these emigrants. There was no Moon at the time when the blacks populated Australia, or for a very long time afterwards. There had been 2 very small moons much earlier, about 6 million years ago, which revolved around Earth, eventually colliding with it. Earth was not inhabited at the time, so, although terrible cataclysms followed, it didn't really matter. About 500,000 years ago, Earth captured a much larger moon, the one which exists now. It was passing too close to your planet and was attracted into an orbit. This often happens with moons. Further catastrophes were provoked by this event. What do you mean when you say passing too close to Earth? Why didn't it crash? And anyway, what is a moon? It could have crashed indeed, but that doesn't often happen. A moon is originally a small planet revolving around its sun in a spiral that becomes increasingly tight. The smaller planets spiral more rapidly than the larger ones, whose inertial force is less. Their spiral being faster, the smaller planets often catch up to the larger planets, and if they pass too closely, the gravitational attraction of the planet will be stronger than that of the sun. The smaller planet begins to orbit the larger one, still in a spiral, which will, sooner or later, result in a collision. Are you saying that our beautiful moon, celebrated in poem and song, will one day fall on our heads? One day, yes, but not for about 195,000 years. I must have seemed relieved, and my fright somewhat comical, for my hosts all laughed. Tao continued, "When that happens, when the moon collides with the Earth, that will be the end of your planet. If the people of Earth are not sufficiently spiritually and technologically advanced at the time, it will mean a holocaust. But if they are, they will have evacuated to another planet. Everything in its time, though, Michel. For now, I must finish off my story concerning the continent of Mu. Savanasa, then, was situated on a vast plateau overlooking plains which rose on average no more than 30 meters above sea level. On the plateau and in the center, an enormous pyramid was constructed. Each stone used in its construction, some weighing more than 50 tons, was cut precisely to within 1/5 of a millimeter, using what we call ultrasonic vibratory systems. This was done in the quarries of Holoton, now found on Easter Island, which was the one place on the entire continent where this special rock could be found. There was, however, another quarry at Natora, southwest of the continent. The enormous stones were transported using anti-gravitational techniques well known to these people. They were carried on platforms, 20 centimeters above the paved roads, and were constructed using the same principles as those of the pyramids. Roads such as these were built all over the country, converging like a massive spider's web on the capital, Savanasa. The huge stones were taken to Savanasa and put into position according to directions from the master or chief architect on the project. When finished, the pyramid measured exactly 440.01 meters in height, and its 4 faces were oriented precisely towards the 4 points of the compass. Was this intended to be the king's palace or his tomb? Everyone wore the same indulgent smile that often appeared when I asked a question. Nothing of the sort, Michel. The pyramid was much more important. It was a tool. An enormous tool, I admit, but a tool just the same. So, too, was the pyramid of Cheops in Egypt, though it was much smaller in size. A tool? Please explain. I'm no longer with you. It was true I was having trouble following Tao, but I could sense one of the great mysteries was about to be revealed to me, one which had provoked so much inquiry and had been the subject of so much writing on Earth. You will have realized, Tao resumed, that these were highly advanced people. They possessed a profound understanding of universal law and used their pyramid as a captor of cosmic rays, forces and energies, as well as terrestrial energies. Inside, rooms positioned according to a precise plan served the king and certain other great initiates as powerful communication centers, enabling telepathic communication with other planets and other worlds in the universe. Such communication with extraterrestrials is no longer possible for people on Earth, but the people of Mu in those days, by natural means and by exploiting cosmic forces, were in constant communication with other beings and were even able to explore parallel universes. Was this the sole purpose of the pyramid? Not quite. Its second use was to make rain. By a system of plates made of a special alloy incorporating silver as its main component, these people were able, in a few days, to cause the accumulation of clouds above the country, and so to have the rain as they needed it. Thus they were able to create, virtually, a paradise over the whole continent. Rivers and springs never dried up, but flowed lazily across the numerous plains of land that was essentially flat. Fruit trees were laden with fruit, bowing under the weight of oranges, mandarins, or apples, according to latitude. Exotic fruits, of kinds that actually no longer exist on Earth, were harvested in abundance. One such fruit, called the lycoti, possessed a property that caused an excitation of brain activity, allowing whoever ate it to solve problems which would normally be beyond them. This property was not actually a drug, but the fruit was, nevertheless, condemned by the sages. The lycoti was only authorized to be planted in the gardens of the king. Man being what he is, however, the fruit was secretly planted in various places throughout the continent. Those caught with the fruit were harshly punished, for they had directly disobeyed the king of Mu. In matters of religion and government, he was to be obeyed absolutely, as he was the representative of the Great Spirit. As such, the king was not one to be worshipped. He simply represented another. Those people believed in Tharoa, the god, the spirit, the one and only, the creator of all things, and of course they believed in reincarnation. What concerns us here, Michel, are the great events which occurred on your planet in times long gone, so that you will be able to enlighten your people. I won't therefore elaborate on my description of the continent that was home to one of the best organized civilizations to have existed on Earth. However, you should know that after a period of 50,000 years, the population of Mu was 80 million. Expeditions were undertaken regularly to explore and research aspects of the planet. For these expeditions, they used flying ships, similar to what you call flying saucers. It was known that most of the planet was populated by black, yellow, and also white races, although the latter had regressed into a primitive state due to their loss of technical understanding right at the beginning. These white people had actually arrived on Earth in very small numbers at a time in between the arrival of the Baccaratinians and the colonizing of Mu. They had settled on a continent known to you as Atlantis, but as much for material as spiritual reasons, their civilization failed completely. What do you mean by material reasons? Natural disasters, which effectively destroyed their towns, and almost all that might have allowed them to advance technologically. I must emphasize the following point. Prior to embarking on their exploratory expeditions of the planet, the inhabitants of Mu had conducted research by means of the Pyramid of Savanasa. As a result of this research, it was decided to send forth the flying ships and to colonize New Guinea and the southern Asiatic region, that is, all to the west of Mu. Simultaneously, they set up colonies in South America and Central America. Most importantly, they established a colonial base, which grew into a huge town in the area known to your archaeologists as Thiaooubans, located not far from Lake Titicaca. The Andes did not exist at the time. The mountains formed some time later, as you will soon see. At Thiaooubans, an enormous seaport was built. In those days, North and South America were flat, and eventually a canal was constructed to link an inland sea, existing where Brazil is now, with the Pacific Ocean. This sea also had an outlet into the Atlantic Ocean, so that it was possible to pass from one ocean to the other, and so to colonize the continent of Atlantis. But you say they had flying ships. Why wouldn't they use them? If they'd pierced a canal, they must have intended to use boats. They used their flying machines just as you now use aeroplanes, Michel. But for very heavy loads, they used machines of anti-gravitation, exactly like the heavy vehicles they used now on Earth. So, as I said, they colonized the continent of Atlantis. Many white people from Atlantis preferred at the time to emigrate to the region of northern Europe, and they didn't accept the new government and the new religion coming from you. These white people set off in their sea vessels propelled by steam and wind. Indeed, the white race had discovered steam power, having passed through a period you would call prehistoric. I must also explain that Britain was not an island at this time, as it was joined to northern Europe, and the Straits of Gibraltar didn't exist either, as Africa reached to the south of Europe. Many white people from Atlantis emigrated to North Africa, mixing with the crossbred black-yellow race of the area. Interbreeding created new races in North Africa which have perpetuated themselves over thousands of years and which you know as Berbers, Tuaregs and others. We often visited Earth during those times. When we judged the time opportune, we went overtly to visit the King of Mu, and according to his request or the information he gave us, we would visit the new colonies. In India, for example, or in New Guinea, the people of Mu sometimes experienced great difficulties assimilating their civilizations with that already in existence. We would arrive openly and publicly in vessels quite like the one that brought you to Thiaooubans, although different in shape. Our size, which has always been large, and our radiant beauty meant that we passed as gods in the eyes of people who were not greatly advanced, and in some cases were even cannibals. According to our mission, it was important that we impress as friendly gods in the eyes of the colonizers so that war could be avoided, something which they abhorred on account of their advancement, their beliefs and their religion. It is because of our frequent visits during this period that there are so many legends on Earth describing giants and chariots of fire from the heavens. We were great friends with the inhabitants of Mu, and my astral entity at the time existed in a body quite similar to the one I'm wearing now. Artists and sculptors gave us much consideration. They consulted the King of Mu, and with his consent worked to immortalize us. The immense statues at Holoton, Easter Island, are examples of such work. They were, for the civilization of the time, the ultimate of great art, being in size and shape what you would describe as stylized. This is how a statue of me came to be sculpted. It was finished and ready to be transported on one of the enormous platforms that serviced the length and breadth of the country, terminating always in Savanasa. The master of the time erected these statues either in the king's gardens or along the path that led to the pyramid. Unfortunately, when the statue representing me, along with several others, was about to be transported, a cataclysm occurred which destroyed the continent of Mu. However, Holoton was partially spared. When I say partially, you must realize that the quarries had been 10 times as extensive as the vestiges that remain today. The part that wasn't swallowed up in the cataclysm was the area where my statue stood. My stylized image is thus preserved on Easter Island. When you told me you had dreamed of me in the form of a statue on Easter Island, and I confirmed that I was, you thought I was being metaphorical, but that was only half right. You see, Michel, certain dreams, and yours most definitely, are influenced by Latanusi. That is something for which there is no corresponding word in any earth language. It is not necessary for you to understand the phenomenon, but under its influence it is a true dream. Tao ended her account at that point, flashing her familiar smile and adding, "If you have difficulty remembering all that, I will help you in good time." With that, she rose, and we all did likewise.